Hi, Crossing Church. How you doing? You doing all right? Yeah, you doing? I hope you're doing okay. I want to welcome everyone that's joining from all of our locations. You know, I've been noticing some stuff that's been going on, and I know we're going to be talking about care, but that's normal behavior for the Crossing. And I'm just so proud of you. I mean, I was looking at this is the McDonaldVoice.com. This was in the paper up in Macomb this week. What they did, I think it was Saturday, they opened the church up and the parking lot up for a food drive, a food giveaway. And it was just awesome. 290 people from 110 families were ministered to. Something that Carrie DePoy was in charge of and brought a lot of different churches together. And that got to happen at the Crossing. It's awesome. It's something that they're doing on a regular basis. And I just think that's great. And Kirksville, you know, we've got a big building in Kirksville, and there's a lot of that space that we don't use for regular church activities. And we've been able to partner with the food bank for Missouri. And now they're utilizing that space. They don't have to pay any rent. And there's a program that they have called the Buddy Pack program for kids that wouldn't be able to have food over the weekend. And they service 300 young people every week out of that food bank. And that's something that happens in Kirksville. And just so happened that today I got a note from the guy that runs the Missouri Food Bank just thanking me and talking about what a great example those of you that are in Kirksville are to him and his family, the kind of impact it's having on his family. And the thing I like the best about this was it talked about, it says, I'm enjoying the relational emphasis of Jesus and with one another. I think about how that is just actually coming to pass in Kirksville. Here at 929, the 929 campus serviced, 80-some families, 260-some people just today in their food pantry. There's just so much caring that's going on. And we're just talking about food. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I just want to just take a moment and thank all of you that are just stepping out and saying, you know, I wanted to put some legs on my faith and just minister to the needs of other people and get connected. I know that at 929, when they do the food, they sit down at a table and they have time and they pray together. And so you can see Christ come into those relationships. And maybe there's an opportunity to get to know somebody, ask them who they are and how they're doing, and just push out a little bit farther. You know, it's only been a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago. I think I see Justin over there. They did garage sales for Somalia, right? And how much money was raised? I know you can't hear this. What? How much? $13,000 out of garage sales, and that to be sent to Samaritan's Purse. So that can be distributed out into the needs of that country while it is in this terrible famine. I mean, thinking locally, thinking globally, all sorts of different ways that people are trying to express this simple truth that I want to talk about today, and that's care. We've talked about accept, we've talked about belong, and now I want to talk about care. So how do I do that? How do I care the way that Jesus wants me to? You know, in Matthew 25, Jesus goes through this teaching with his disciples, and he says, and many of you have heard this scripture. I've used it before. I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was a stranger. You invited me in. I was sick, and you came to visit me. I was in prison, and you came to me. I was naked and you clothed me. I mean, he just goes through all of these different kinds of felt needs. And then he talks about how people had ministered to them. And they ask him, when did we see you like that, Jesus? And he said, inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, my brothers, you've done it to me. He also looks at the other group of people that are separated out in that story, and they hadn't done that. And he said, inasmuch as you failed to do it to the least of these, you failed to do it to me. Obviously, Jesus wants me to care in physical and intangible ways. So I know that this is something that he commands, but I want to see it in the context of what we've already said in the last 2 weeks. You really can't love, and caring is an expression of love, isn't that right? I mean, if I say, to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, Matthew 22, and to love your neighbor as yourself, caring is an expression of love. But one thing I said in the past couple of weeks is this: you cannot love outside of a what? A relationship. You can't love outside of a relationship. So how do I do that? I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about it a lot. How do I do that personally? I think about some things that have happened in my life, some relationships that I'm in. I'm in a relationship with a man many of you have met, some of you know, some of you don't, P.V. John, missionary to India. And I've been in a relationship with P.V. John for over 20 years. Now, when I was in India the last time, and some other of you from the church, from several of our locations, we had the opportunity to see a lot of that great ministry that happens in a lot of different ways, with widows, with orphans. It was incredible. And there were a number of the orphans that had not been sponsored when we first came. And it was amazing how we just sucked those orphans up, and people were just divvying them out real quick. And I ended up with an orphan whose name is Abhilash. And Abhilash means grapefruit. And so his name's Grapefruit. And he had only been there for a couple of weeks. He was very reserved. He really didn't act like he really wanted to interact with anybody. And, I was talking to PV about his story and his life, and he said his mother and his father both drank poison and committed suicide. And the pastor of his village found him on the street, just trying to eat, just trying to survive. And so my compassion and my heart, it went out to him. And while that was happening with me and my story, it was happening to a lot of others, and with their stories connecting with some of these orphans. And so, it wasn't any big deal. It wasn't hard for me to say, yeah, I want to sponsor that young man. I want to pray for him. I want to think about him. But do I really love him? I mean, I saw him then, and someone was trying to explain to him in his own language that I was going to sponsor him. I don't know that he even understood that. You know what I'm saying? And I probably won't be back for a couple of years, so he won't see me. And maybe there's some interaction that can happen via email or things that could be sent through PV John. But there's something that I want to say about that, and that is that I love him through a relationship. But it may not be a relationship directly with him. PV and Molly John are kind of the parents for all the girls and all the boys in those orphanages. They're the surrogate parents. And because I'm in relationship with PV John, I want you to see this. He can be in daily relationship with those orphans. And I can love those orphans, or that particular orphan, Abhilash, I can love him through PV John's influence. It's not that I raised PV John up, but in that relationship I have with him, that my relationship extends through him into that young man, that God would grow that young man. So it's not like I'm throwing something out there and I'm saying, be well and be filled and be satisfied and be clothed, and try to do something that may just relieve my own conscience. There needs to be someone alongside that little boy that walks with him and loves him on a daily basis. You see where I'm driving at? See, sometimes I wonder if when it comes to this idea of care, and I don't want to put this label on any of you. So I'll just put it on myself. Sometimes I wonder if in the process of trying to care, I get more caught up in symbolism over substance. maybe I'm just trying to relieve my own sense of guilt and responsibility. I feel bad about it. It's like when you turn on one of those, the TV, and you get hit with one of those commercials with the kids that need to be fed, and then you feel guilty. You feel like you need to respond. And maybe you do by writing a check, but does that really serve as a Band-Aid to deal with your guilt because you're really not loving in relationship? So that's what I've been thinking about. I've been turning that over and over in my mind. And it occurred to me, and I want you to think about this, that it's really impossible for us to love everybody the same. Because there's going to be some people that we are going to invest in our time and our energy, and then there's going to be a lot of people that we don't invest in, right? Let's say you wanted to adopt a child. And so you go to a developing country, and they've picked a child out for you. So you might adopt that child, but what about all of them that you leave behind? What about them? They just didn't hit the lotto. Am I able to love the children that I leave, the children that I don't adopt, every bit as much as the one that I do adopt? That's my question. And if I'm looking at that in my own life, I'm going, no. I mean, the one that I bring home is the one that I'm going to invest in. It's the one I'm going to be in relationship with. It's the one that I'm going to pay the bills for. It's the one you see what I'm saying? How do I do this? How can I be like Jesus? If Jesus says to love others as I love myself, how can I invest and love and care about everybody else the same? How do I walk it out? That's troubling. I look at my life as a pastor, and I know that a lot of this is in first person, and it's just because I've been thinking a lot about it. I spend a lot of my time, and over the last 30 years, I have spent a lot of my time managing crisis. It's what I do. So people come in, and their marriage is shot. They hate each other. Usually the pastor, when they go to the pastor, it's like what? That's the Hail Mary, right? That's the 60-yard pass at the end of the game, and we just hope somebody, like we're about to give up on this marriage. I mean, we've tried everything else, so we'll try God. We've been goofing up this marriage for 30 years. We're going to give you the next hour to fix it. Sometimes that's how I feel. Like, really? And so it's like trying to deal with a crisis in a marriage, or someone comes with a personal issue and it's just completely overtaken them, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. And it's not just things that happen maybe locally or in particular ministry. It could happen globally. I mean, we hear about something like something that happens in New Orleans, or something that happens in Joplin, or something, and we go, okay, how do we... But I mean, when you look at it, those of us that went to Joplin and you looked and just see the whole place flat, and it's like, what, okay, we sent 2 semi-trailers. How big of a difference did that make? Are we loving everybody equally? Are we loving everybody to the fullest extent of our love? I don't know how to do this. Does anybody else think this way? Does anybody else feel this way? Or, it's like, well, if I just help mine, then somebody else can help theirs. If I just do my part, other people do their part. I'm not responsible for their part, just my part. But that's not how I see Jesus, really. I mean, I'm just going, so how do I do this? I want to go back to what Jesus said in Matthew 22 as it applies to caring. And that is to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, to love your neighbor as yourself. Love happens in relationship. So I need to be in relationship. In ministry, I might spend a lot of time putting out brush fires, but there's a bigger issue. Have you noticed in your life, no matter how many brush fires you put out, what happens? There's just more. No matter how many plates you're able to keep spinning and not fall, there's always someone adding more plates. Usually it might even be you, right? more plates to spin, more brush fires to put out. I want you to think about this along with me. The bigger issue here is whether or not in relationship we are raising up people to put alongside other people. Look at Jesus. I mean, if you want to see the example of how to do this, look at Jesus. How many people did Jesus invest in? Well, obviously we know he had 12 apostles, right? And there were 12 men that he did life with day and night for 3 years. He invested, poured his life into 12 men. Out of those 12 men, he spent a lot of time with 3. Peter, James, and John. They ended up with more time than the rest. But he did not just do 12, and he didn't just do 3. He also had 70. Did you know that? He had 70. And if you look in the historical literature, what you're going to find out is some of the big names of the New Testament weren't part of the 12 or the 3. They were part of the 70. You ever heard of Stephen, the first martyr? Or Philip, the evangelist? And we could go on and on. Who are those 70? Because he invested in them too. He sent them out. And I want you to see something, capture something that I captured this week. It's in Luke chapter 10, and this is when he sends out the 70. When Jesus does that, he had already sent the 12 out. The 12 had come back. Then he sent out these 70 guys, and then they came back. And when he sent them out, he gave them specific instructions, and they were supposed to go out to the villages and towns that he was going to go to, but they would go before him and get people prepared for Jesus' arrival and for Jesus' preaching. They were to go out ahead of time and build relationships with people. And then Jesus was going to come in, and he was going to work through the relationships that had already been built with the 70 he sent out into those communities. So when Jesus moved to the next community and the next community, guess what? The people that he was leaving behind, that he had preached this message to, had other people next to them that he had sent into that community to disciple them and to be in relationship with them. Look what he says in verse 16. It's so cool. This one, it says, the one who listens to you listens to me. And the one who rejects you rejects me. And he who rejects me rejects the one who sent me. So what you see Jesus accomplishing here is a network. Jesus is raising up disciples, 3, 12, 70. Are you seeing this? He's raising up disciples who then in turn do what? Raise up more disciples. And it's all happening in relationship. They're loving each other in relationship. So these 70 are having that relationship in their own villages and towns with the people that they're building relationship with. And Jesus' influence is going through into those people. I just thought that was incredible. You know, later on, after Jesus died and was buried and rose from the dead and ascended into heaven, he said to stay in Jerusalem and wait for the promise of the Father. And it says then in the book of Acts that there were 120 of them in that upper room. So Jesus had 3, he had 12, he had 70, and he had 120. He had 120 in Jerusalem. We're not talking about just men now. We're talking about men and women that had been raised up. And those 120 people were going to have a dramatic impact on other people through relationship. There's a great story just a couple of pages behind us in Luke chapter 8. And you may have heard this story before in Luke 8. But it's Jesus is actually looking for some time off, and he goes to the far side of the Sea of Galilee. And in the process, I mean, no sooner puts his boat up on shore, here comes this crazy man naked, comes running out of the cemetery. I don't know if you know this story or not, but he's a demon-possessed man. He's got a whole legion of demons. He says, my name is Legion, for we are many. Jesus casts those demons out. and they go into a herd of pigs and they run off a cliff. You know that story? Okay, and then after that all happens, the people from the region are scared to death of Jesus and they want him to leave. Get out of here. We don't want you. You're freaking us out. And here's this demon-possessed man. I want us to look at verse 38 of chapter 8. Powerful verse. It says, "But the man from whom the demons had gone out was begging him that he might accompany him." So this man who's been miraculously delivered is saying, "Jesus, I want to go with you." I mean, that's fair. But Jesus won't let him. Jesus says no. Listen to what it says. It says, "But he sent him away." Listen why. "So he went away proclaiming," let me go back. Sent him away saying, "Return to your house and describe what things God has done for you." So he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city the great things Jesus had done for him. What did Jesus do? He raised him up and then he sent him out. Now, do you think that Jesus left that guy out there by himself? Or do you think that Jesus would have put someone in his path that he could have been in relationship with? That's how he did it. And all of a sudden it starts making sense to me how I really care about people. How I get beyond symbolism into substance. It comes by raising up people who can then raise up people who can then raise up people. And maybe you're going, "Hey, I'm not Jesus. I don't have a 70. I don't have 120. I don't even have a 12. Well, do you have a 1 or 2 or 3? We all have a 1 or a 2 or a 3. And then maybe if we see God doing amazing things in those 1s and 2s and 3s, maybe we can move on to more. You know, I was talking to Chris McKenzie, as one of the community directors at this location, and he was sharing about a man named Peter in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, that he's developed a relationship with. You know what this guy does? He works on the street with children. And the children that he works with are not the poorest of children, but poor children that are sent out primarily by their parents to beg. And they actually make a living off of begging. And so what Peter does is he comes up with the money to pay off the parents so that instead of going out begging, they would be willing to let Peter teach them in school. He has 2 schools on 2 sides of Addis Ababa. And he teaches these kids using the Bible. They're learning God's word in Ethiopia. He's got one church, a little church in Indiana that supports him. That's it. He has no one else. And that's what he's doing. Now, you know, maybe Chris McKenzie and Lee McKenzie, maybe they can't be there. Maybe they can't do that right now. Maybe there's a part of them that would really like to be in relationship with all those children. But there's so many barriers, right? There's the distance, there's the language, there's the culture. There's all of those barriers that would take a long time. And that's not insurmountable. Don't get me wrong. You could do that, and God could call you to that, and it could be amazing. But what can they do through that relationship with Peter? How much impact can they have through him? And building that relationship. Maybe Peter can raise up one of these who could make a huge difference. There's a young man in the orphanage, or that grew up in the orphanage in India that we met. And it is amazing how much he is accomplishing for the ministry in India now. You can actually see that disciples are raising up disciples who are raising up disciples even out of their orphanages. It's absolutely incredible. So maybe what we need to do, if we really want to care, and we want that care to actually get some traction, is to create a network, to let God create a network out of the people that are around you right now, people that you're in relationship to right now, and empowering them through discipleship and giving them opportunities and places to serve. You know, at the conclusion of the journey of the 70, and we read about that in Luke 10, at the conclusion of that journey, Jesus is winding that whole missionary thing down, and he meets someone. It's in verse 38 and 39 of Luke 10. It says, "Now as they were traveling along, he entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. And she had a sister named Mary, who was seated at the Lord's feet, listening to his word." Isn't that amazing? Just a relationship. Just, hey, Martha invited Jesus into the home, Mary, and then there was a brother named Lazarus that Jesus ended up raising from the dead. And you know what? Jesus got into a relationship with this family. He spent some time with this family. Later on, you see that he's having a meal with them. After Lazarus has been raised from the dead, he's having a meal with them. And in the middle of that meal, what ends up happening? Read the story in Matthew 26, verse 6. It says, "Now when Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him." This is Mary, of Mary and Martha, "with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume, and she poured it on his head as he reclined at the table. But the disciples were indignant when they saw this. And they said, 'Why this waste? For this perfume might have been sold for a high price and the money given to the poor.' But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, 'Why do you bother the woman? For she has done a good thing for me. You'll always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. For when she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for my burial. Truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached into the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken in memory of her.'" He was in a discipleship relationship with this family and with this woman, Mary. And through that relationship, she was going to end up discipling others. Wherever people tell my story, they're going to tell her story. She's going to have an impact. Discipleship was happening. It was happening in relationship. Mary needed to express her love. She needed to express her love for Jesus. She did it in relationship. There's a lady, some of you might know, many of you don't know, that goes to the 48th Street campus, a wonderful couple, Betty and Emery Kaufman. I've been with her to Israel. We've developed a relationship over the years. Wonderful, wonderful lady. Betty and Emery are in the sunset years of their life. And Betty has a passion for girls, women that are in jail and coming out of jail. And she does a thing called the Well House. And do you know the Well House has been operating for a long time without a house? Just a passion in her heart. A passion that's gone from her heart into the hearts of others. We really want to be this. We want to do this. We don't have a house, but we want to do it. And you know what? She would not give up on that passion. People would try to talk her out of it. They'd try to say, well, maybe we could do this. And you know what? That was in her heart for God. And she never lost her temper. She never had an attitude. But she kept focused on her passion. Yes, guess what they had? What they bought this year? A house. Yeah, it's awesome. You know, it's cool. Here in Quincy on Broadway, they have a house on Broadway. She sent me a letter just to a card just to encourage me about how she appreciates me, and I'm thinking I appreciate her. We can't pour ourselves into everybody, but we can pour ourselves into some people who can then pour themselves into other people who can pour themselves into other people, and now you're starting to look the way that Jesus looked. You're starting to act the way that Jesus acts. This is why it is so important that we become disciples who make disciples, because that means we can truly and honestly care about each other the way that Jesus told us and showed us how to care for each other. And when we do it God's way, we leave a network of relationships tied together with love for one another, and all of us together loving God. You know, an attractional church is nothing more, really, than emergency management. It's really nothing more than trying to help someone in the midst of crisis. You know, when a person comes forward and accepts Christ. But listen, and that's not a bad thing, but that can't be the only thing, because there has to be relationships built. So if a person says, you know, my life is all goofed up, I need somebody, I need help. Somebody needs to come alongside that person and love them the way that Jesus tells them to love them. And we have to be encouraging and lifting up people who do that for other people, who can then do that for other people. There needs to be those of us here in this location, all of our locations need to be looking for that opportunity. And if you have your 12 or you're 18 or you're 6 or whatever, praise God for that. Who are you pouring into? We cannot be just a big church. We have to be a disciple-making church. In Matthew 28, and I'll close with this. In Matthew chapter 28, Jesus gave us the Great Commission. And the Great Commission was to go and make disciples. Make disciples. And the way that you do that is by going, baptizing, and teaching, right? Interesting, that word going. The literal translation of that word is as you go. As you go. Do you know that just in a few more minutes, we're going to sing our last song. And you're going to get up, and you're going to turn around, and you're going to go. You're going to go from the building to the parking lot, and from the parking lot into the car someplace else. What are you thinking about as you go? It could be as short a distance as going from here to the restaurant, something that you do at the restaurant. It could be the other side of the earth as you go. As you go. If we really care about people, if we really want to capture what it means to care, then we have to raise up people, even as we are raised up. Disciples who make disciples. We're moving to a time of decision.